When Game of Thrones first arrived on our screens, it felt like something new, a force of nature in the landscape of television. Based on the sprawling novels by George R. R. Martin, the series captured the imagination of millions around the globe. It became more than just a show. It was a weekly event, a shared cultural experience that dominated conversations, social media, and our collective consciousness. The series grew from a dedicated following to a global juggernaut, with its audience swelling from an average of 9 million viewers in its first season to over 33 million by its seventh. It was a testament to the power of storytelling on a grand cinematic scale delivered right into our living rooms. The scale of its success is simply staggering. The show was nominated for an incredible number of awards, over 650 in total, and it brought home nearly 400 of them. Among these were a record-breaking 59 Emmy Awards, a feat that cemented its place in television history as one of the most decorated series of all time. But what was the secret to its magnetic appeal? Was it the shocking plot twists, the complex characters, or the spectacular battles? It was all of those things, certainly, but there was something deeper at play, something that felt strangely familiar, even in a world of ice zombies and fire-breathing dragons. The truth is, while Westeros is a land of fantasy, its foundations are firmly rooted in the soil of our own history. George R. R. Martin, a self-proclaimed history buff, drew heavily from the dramatic and often brutal events of the past to construct his world. The political intrigue, the dynastic struggles, and the sudden violent shifts in power were not just products of a fertile imagination. They were echoes of real human conflicts, real betrayals, and real wars that shaped our world. This connection to reality is what gave the story its weight, its grit, and its profound sense of authenticity, making the fantasy feel startlingly real. This essay is a journey back in time, not to the mythical age of heroes, but to the actual historical periods that gave birth to the sagas of Westeros. We will explore the bloody civil war that inspired the central conflict between the Starks and the Lannisters. We will meet the real kings, queens, and warriors who served as blueprints for characters like Ned Stark, Cersei Lannister, and Daenerys Targaryen. We will uncover the ancient military secrets behind Wildfire, the Scottish massacres that parallel the infamous Red Wedding, and the Roman Wall that became the model for the colossal ice barrier in the north. Come, let us peel back the layers of fantasy and discover the history hidden within. The central conflict in Game of Thrones, the epic struggle for control of the Iron Throne, is not a new story. It's a retelling of one of England's most chaotic and bloody civil wars, the Wars of the Roses. This 15th century conflict wasn't fought over a throne of swords but for the crown of England itself. The main players were two rival branches of the royal family, the House of Lancaster, whose symbol was a red rose, and the House of York, symbolized by a white rose. The parallels are striking. It's no coincidence that the ambitious, wealthy House Lannister shares a name so similar to Lancaster, while the honorable northern House Stark mirrors the struggles of the Yorks. The seeds of this real-life war were sown after the long reign of King Edward III. When he died, the crown passed to his young grandson, Richard II, bypassing his other powerful sons. This decision created deep-seated resentment and rival claims that would fester for decades. In 1399, Henry of House Lancaster deposed the king, setting a dangerous precedent. The situation escalated when his grandson, King Henry VI, proved to be a weak and mentally unstable ruler, much like the Mad King Aerys Targaryen. His instability created a power vacuum, and the noble houses of England began to choose sides, setting the stage for a devastating, multi-generational war. The trigger for open warfare was the rise of a powerful figure from the north, Richard, Duke of York. He was appointed protector of the realm to govern in the king's stead during his periods of madness. Richard was a capable and popular leader who tried to curb the crown's excessive spending and restore order. This made him a hero to the common people but a grave threat to the ruling Lancastrian queen. She saw him as a rival who coveted the throne for himself and his family. The tension between the Queen's faction and the Duke of York's supporters eventually erupted into open battle, plunging the entire kingdom into a civil war that would last for 30 years. This historical saga of ambition, betrayal, and bloodshed provided the perfect template for the core drama of Westeros. The Lannisters and the Starks are not just fighting for power. They are reenacting a historical drama that played out on the battlefields of England more than 500 years ago. The shifting allegiances, the shocking betrayals, and the tragic deaths that define Game of Thrones all have their roots in this real-world conflict. The names and the symbols may have changed, from Lancaster and York to Lannister and Stark, but the brutal human story of a kingdom tearing itself apart remains hauntingly the same. Many of the most memorable characters in Game of Thrones feel so vivid because they are inspired by real historical figures whose lives were just as dramatic. Take Lord Eddard Ned Stark, the Honorable Warden of the North. His story closely mirrors that of Richard, Duke of York. Like Ned, Richard was a powerful lord from the north who was called to the capital to serve as the king's chief advisor and protector. He was known for his integrity and gained immense popularity by trying to reform a corrupt court, which made the queen see him as a direct threat to her power and her son's claim to the throne. Ultimately, Richard was defeated, captured, and executed, his head mockingly displayed on the gates of the city of York with a paper crown. On the other side of the conflict, we have the formidable Cersei Lannister, who finds her historical counterpart in Margaret of Anjou, the French wife of the weak King Henry VI. Queen Margaret was a fierce, intelligent, and ruthless woman who was deeply involved in the politics of the court. Disliked by the English people for her foreign origins and her perceived manipulation of the king, she fought tenaciously to protect her son's inheritance against the claims of the House of York. Like Cersei, Margaret was a master strategist and a political force to be reckoned with, a queen who would stop at nothing to destroy her enemies and secure her family's legacy. The younger generation also has its historical parallels. Robb Stark, the young wolf who leads a rebellion to avenge his father's death, is a clear echo of Richard of York's son, Edward IV. After his father was killed, the young and charismatic Edward took up the Yorkist cause, proving to be a brilliant military commander who led his family's armies to several key victories against the Lancasters. And then there is the cruel and sadistic Prince Joffrey Baratheon. His real-life doppelganger was Edward of Westminster, the son of Queen Margaret of Anjou. Historical accounts describe Prince Edward as a handsome but violent young man who spoke of nothing but cutting off heads and making war, a chilling reflection of Joffrey's own monstrous nature. These historical connections give the characters a depth and complexity that pure fantasy often lacks. Their motivations, their triumphs, and their tragic flaws are grounded in the experiences of real people who navigated the treacherous currents of power, love, and war. By drawing on the lives of figures like Richard of York and Margaret of Anjou, George R.R. Martin created characters who are not just archetypes, but complex human beings. Their struggles feel authentic because in many ways they have happened before, written not in ink but in the blood and tears of history. Across the narrow sea, an exiled royal plots her return to claim a lost throne. Daenerys Targaryen's story, that of a claimant growing up in a foreign land, believing in her destiny to rule, is powerfully reminiscent of a key figure who ended the Wars of the Roses, Henry Tudor. Henry was a Lancastrian claimant who spent much of his youth in exile in France while the House of York ruled England. From a young age he was raised with the belief that he was the rightful king, a destiny that seemed almost impossible to achieve. He had no army, no great wealth, and only a distant claim to the throne, yet he possessed an unshakable confidence in his right to rule. Like Daenerys, who slowly built her following from nothing, Henry Tudor had to rely on strategy, diplomacy, and the support of those who were dissatisfied with the current regime. In 1485, he made his move. With ships provided by the French king, Henry crossed the English Channel and landed in Wales. The Welsh, who had long resented English rule, saw him as a liberator and flocked to his banner, providing him with the army he so desperately needed. This mirrors Daenerys' journey in Essos, where she gathers an army of Unsullied and a horde of Dothraki, all united by their belief in her cause. Henry's campaign culminated in the legendary Battle of Bosworth Field, where his smaller, less experienced army faced the forces of the Yorkist King Richard III. Through a combination of clever tactics and the timely betrayal of some of Richard's key allies, Henry Tudor emerged victorious. In a single battle he ended the reign of the House of York and seized the crown for himself, becoming King Henry VII. This decisive victory from an underdog claimant who came from across the sea is the historical blueprint for Daenerys' planned invasion of Westeros, a final epic confrontation to reclaim her birthright. But Henry's greatest act of political genius came after the battle. To finally heal the decades-long rift that had torn England apart, he married Elizabeth of York, a princess from the rival house. This marriage united the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York, creating the new Tudor dynasty and ending the Wars of the Roses for good. This masterful political union is echoed in the proposed alliance between Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow. It represents the ultimate strategy, not just to conquer, but to unite a fractured kingdom and bring a lasting peace, forging a new future from the ashes of the old. The Red Wedding stands as one of the most shocking and brutal events in Game of Thrones, a moment that left audiences horrified and breathless. The betrayal of the Starks by their supposed allies, the Freys, under the sacred laws of hospitality, seemed like a uniquely cruel twist of fantasy. However, this infamous scene was not born from imagination alone. It was inspired by two real and equally horrific events from Scottish history. The first is known as the Black Dinner, which took place in 1440. The young William Douglas, the 16-year-old head of Scotland's most powerful clan, was invited to a feast with the 10-year-old King James II at Edinburgh Castle. The feast was a trap. The king's advisors, who feared the Douglas clan's immense power and influence, had orchestrated the entire event to eliminate their rivals. Toward the end of the meal, a servant entered carrying a platter with the head of a black bull, a traditional symbol of death in Scotland. The moment the chilling symbol was placed on the table, the king's men seized the young Earl of Douglas and his little brother. They were dragged outside, put through a mock trial, and brutally executed. This shocking act of betrayal against guests at a royal feast is a direct historical parallel to the calculated slaughter of Robb Stark and his followers at the Twins. The second event that inspired the Red Wedding is the massacre of Glencoe in 1692. The MacDonald clan of Glencoe had been slow to pledge allegiance to the new king, William of Orange. As a punishment, a troop of soldiers, led by Captain Robert Campbell, was sent to their lands. Crucially, the Campbells were rivals of the MacDonalds, but they arrived under the guise of friendship, seeking shelter from the harsh winter. The MacDonalds, honoring the sacred laws of Highland hospitality, welcomed the soldiers into their homes, feeding them and giving them lodging for nearly 2 weeks. They lived together, shared meals, and drank together. Then, in the dead of night on February 13th, the soldiers turned on their hosts. Following secret orders, they went from house to house, murdering the MacDonalds in their sleep. They slaughtered dozens of men while women and children who managed to escape fled into a blizzard, where most froze to death. The Glencoe massacre became a symbol of ultimate betrayal, a violation of the most sacred trust between a host and a guest. The combination of the Black Dinner's political treachery and Glencoe's violation of hospitality provided the perfect, chilling recipe for the Red Wedding, reminding us that the most horrific acts of fiction often have their roots in historical fact. The Wall is one of the most iconic structures in Game of Thrones, a colossal barrier of ice stretching 300 miles and standing 700 feet high. It is the shield that guards the realms of men from the wildlings and the mysterious horrors that lurk beyond. This massive feat of engineering has a very real and direct historical inspiration: Hadrian's Wall in northern England. Built by the Roman Empire starting in 122 AD under the reign of Emperor Hadrian, this stone wall stretched for 73 miles, or 117 kilometers from coast to coast. For the Romans, it marked the absolute northern frontier of their vast empire, the very edge of the civilized world. George R.R. Martin has spoken about the exact moment this piece of history sparked his imagination. During a visit to the UK in the 1980s, he stood atop a section of Hadrian's Wall. As he stared out over the rugged, windswept landscape of northern England, he tried to picture what it must have been like for a Roman soldier stationed there nearly 2,000 years ago. He imagined the soldier peering into the cold, misty hills of Scotland, unsure of what enemies or dangers might emerge from the unknown lands beyond. This feeling of being at the end of civilization, facing a vast and untamed wilderness, was the seed that grew into the concept of the Night's Watch and their lonely vigil on the wall. Like the wall in Westeros, Hadrian's Wall was a monumental military structure. It was fortified with castles, mile castles and turrets, and garrisoned by thousands of Roman legionaries. Their job was not just to keep out the barbarian tribes of Scotland, known to the Romans as the Picts, but also to control trade and movement across the border. The men who served on Hadrian's Wall, like the Brothers of the Night's Watch, came from all corners of the vast empire. They were far from home, living in a harsh and often hostile environment. bound together by duty and a shared sense of purpose at the edge of their known world. The fate of Hadrian's Wall also mirrors the state of the Wall in Game of Thrones. As the Roman Empire weakened and began to crumble, its legions were withdrawn from Britain to defend other parts of the empire. Without soldiers to man it or a powerful state to maintain it, Hadrian's Wall fell into disuse and ruin. It became a relic, a stone monument to a fallen empire. This slow decay is reflected in the struggles of the Night's Watch, an ancient order whose numbers have dwindled and whose castles are falling into ruin. Both walls stand as powerful symbols of the attempt to hold back the forces of chaos, and the inevitable decay that comes when empires fade and the watch is no longer kept. The Dothraki are a terrifying force in the world of Game of Thrones. They are a nomadic people who live on horseback, sweeping across the plains of Essos, conquering cities and instilling fear wherever they go. This culture of masterful horse warriors is heavily based on the nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppe, most notably the Mongols under the leadership of Genghis Khan. The parallels are numerous and clear. The Dothraki are led by a Khal, a title that is a clear linguistic cousin of the Mongol title Khan. Their entire society revolves around the horse, which provides them with food, transport, and their unmatched military advantage. The cultural similarities run deep. The Dothraki value strength and combat prowess above all else, and their warriors wear their hair long, only cutting it upon suffering a defeat. This is a direct nod to the Mongols, who also believed that a man's spirit and strength resided in his hair. The Dothraki's sudden and violent arrival on the world stage of Westeros is also a direct reflection of the Mongol invasion of Europe in the 13th century. European kingdoms were left in a state of shock and terror when these seemingly unstoppable horsemen from the distant east appeared at their borders, conquering vast territories with brutal efficiency. The sheer destructive power of the Mongol horde was unlike anything Europe had ever seen. In a single year, 1241, they swept through Russia, Poland, and Hungary, crushing every army sent against them, and killing nearly half the population of Hungary. To the settled, feudal societies of Europe, the Mongols seemed like an apocalyptic force, a punishment sent from God. Their tactics were swift and merciless, their skill on horseback legendary. This historical shockwave is precisely what the people of Westeros fear, when they hear whispers of a Dothraki Khal uniting the clans to cross the narrow sea, an unstoppable tide of warriors who do not play by the established rules of war. Interestingly, the Mongol advance into Europe was not halted by a great European army, but by internal politics within the Mongol Empire. The death of the great Khan Ogedei forced the Mongol leaders to return to their homeland to elect a successor, saving the rest of Europe from almost certain conquest. This idea of an unstoppable foreign force being checked by its own internal divisions is a recurring theme in history. The Dothraki, like the Mongols, are a force of nature, a culture perfectly adapted to conquest, representing the terror that settled civilizations feel when confronted by a powerful nomadic people whose way of life is war. The story of King Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King, is central to the backstory of Game of Thrones. He began his reign as a promising and charismatic young ruler, only to descend into a spiral of paranoia, cruelty, and insanity, culminating in his desire to burn them all with wildfire. This tragic fall from grace is not without historical precedent. One of the most striking parallels is the reign of the Roman Emperor Nero, who ruled from 54 to 68 AD. Like Aerys, Nero's early years as emperor were considered a golden age, a time of prosperity and stability for the Roman Empire. However, as his reign progressed, Nero's behavior became increasingly erratic and tyrannical. He grew deeply paranoid, seeing conspiracies everywhere. This paranoia led him to murder those closest to him, including his own ambitious mother, his wife, and even his former tutor, the great philosopher Seneca, whom he forced to commit suicide. This descent into madness, where a once beloved ruler becomes a murderous tyrant who eliminates even his own family and advisors, is a perfect mirror for the story of Aerys Targaryen, whose paranoia led him to brutally execute the father and brother of Ned Stark. The most famous event associated with Nero is the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, which destroyed a huge portion of the city. While the cause of the fire is still debated by historians, some ancient accounts, like that of Cassius Dio, claim that Nero watched the city burn from his palace while playing his lyre, utterly detached from the suffering of his people. This image is powerfully echoed in Eris's obsession with wildfire and his chilling final command to burn them all. After the fire, Nero blamed the Christians, a small and unpopular religious sect at the time, leading to their horrific persecution, which included being burned alive as human torches to light his gardens. The end of Nero's reign also bears a striking resemblance to the fall of the Mad King. As his tyranny grew, the Roman Senate and the army turned against him. Declared an enemy of the people, Nero was forced to flee the city. Abandoned by his guards and facing certain capture and execution, he ultimately took his own life. This downfall, brought about by a rebellion against his madness, is a historical parallel to the end of Eris, who was killed by a member of his own Kingsguard, Jaime Lannister, to prevent him from destroying the capital city. Both stories serve as a timeless warning about absolute power and the terrifying fragility of the human mind. Dragons are perhaps the most fantastic element in Game of Thrones, the ultimate symbol of the Targaryen dynasty's lost power and Daenerys' miraculous destiny. These fire-breathing winged reptiles seem to belong purely to the realm of myth. And indeed, dragons are ancient and universal creatures of legend, appearing in the mythologies of cultures all over the world, from ancient Mesopotamia and China to medieval Europe. But where did this universal idea of a giant, scaly, flying monster come from? One compelling theory suggests that dragons are a product of our collective subconscious, a primal monster built from our innate evolutionary fears. Think about the creatures that threatened our earliest ancestors. The dragon combines the key features of humanity's most ancient predators: the slithering body of a snake, the sharp claws and predatory instincts of a great cat or bird of prey, and the terrifying jaws of a crocodile. Add to that a fear of fire, one of nature's most destructive forces, and the awe-inspiring desire for flight, and you have the perfect mythological beast. The dragon is a composite nightmare, an amalgamation of all the things that have hunted us in the dark throughout our history, given wings and a fiery breath. A second, more tangible theory connects the myth of the dragon to the real-world discovery of fossils. Ancient peoples across the globe, from China to Europe, would have occasionally unearthed the massive, petrified bones of dinosaurs. Without the scientific framework of paleontology to understand what they were looking at, what conclusion could they draw? They saw the remains of enormous, reptile-like creatures, unlike anything known in the living world. It is easy to imagine how they might have reconstructed these bones into the skeletons of giant monsters, attributing magical powers to them to explain their existence and disappearance. This connection is not just speculation. A Chinese text from the 4th century BC describes the discovery of dragon bones in Sichuan, a region now famous for its rich deposits of dinosaur fossils. For centuries, these fossils were ground up and used in traditional Chinese medicine. In Europe, the skull of a prehistoric woolly rhinoceros found in Austria in the 14th century was famously declared to be the skull of a dragon slain by a legendary hero. In this way, the real bones of a lost world may have provided the physical evidence that gave life and substance to the myth, transforming a primal fear into a creature that felt tangibly, terrifyingly real.